The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly before James Walker as he tracked a deer through the autumn underbrush. 6 years of self-imposed isolation had honed his senses to razor sharpness. He could read the forest like others read books. Every broken twig, every displaced leaf told a story. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and early frost. James adjusted his worn leather pack, his calloused hands checking the hunting knife at his belt. At 42, his dark hair was flecked with gray, his weathered face marked by years of solitude. He'd left civilization behind after the accident at the research facility, seeking peace in the wilderness rather than face the memories of what he'd lost. The deer's trail led him deeper into the valley, past ancient trees and granite outcrops. As he crested a ridge, something caught his eye, a strange shimmer in the air, like heat waves on a summer day. But this was different. It pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, distorting the forest behind it. James dropped to a crouch, years of survival instincts kicking in. The shimmer intensified, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that made his teeth ache. Suddenly, the air itself seemed to tear open, revealing a sleek vessel of impossible design. It plummeted from the rift, trailing what looked like liquid starlight. The crash was devastating. Trees snapped like twigs as the ship carved a quarter-mile trench through the forest floor. James threw himself behind a boulder as debris rained down around him. When the chaos subsided, an unearthly silence fell over the valley. Common sense told him to retreat, to return to his cabin and pretend this never happened. But 20 years as a research scientist before his self-imposed exile had left him with an insatiable curiosity. He approached the crash site cautiously, knife ready. The vessel was like nothing he'd ever seen. Its hull seemed to flow like liquid metal, its surface marked with intricate patterns that shifted and changed as he watched. A breach in the side revealed a softly glowing interior. As he reached the opening, he heard it, a sound between a gasp and a musical note. Inside, he found her. The alien was humanoid but clearly not human. Her skin was like living crystal, faceted surfaces catching the light and refracting it in mesmerizing patterns. What appeared to be hair was actually a cascade of fine crystalline filaments that chimed softly as she moved. She was injured, purple liquid that must have been blood seeping from several wounds. Her eyes opened, they were like opals, swirling with colors that shouldn't exist. She spoke, her voice resonating like wind through crystal, "Please, help." James hesitated. He'd left humanity behind for a reason, chosen isolation to escape his past. But watching this extraordinary being struggle for life, he couldn't just walk away. "I've got a cabin," he said gruffly, surprised by how rusty his voice sounded after so little use. "Can you walk?" She tried to rise but stumbled. James caught her, surprised by how light she was despite her crystalline appearance. Her skin was cool to the touch and seemed to hum with an inner energy. "My name," she managed, "is Naira." "James," he replied simply, gathering her in his arms. "Hold on. It's a rough trek back." As he carried her through the darkening forest, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life of solitude was about to change dramatically. The weight of Naira in his arms reminded him of everything he'd tried to leave behind: responsibility, connection, the complications of caring for someone else. Yet somehow, it felt right. The sun was setting by the time they reached his cabin, painting the sky in colors that seemed to match Naira's crystalline skin. She had fallen into a fitful sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. As James laid her gently on his bed, he caught his reflection in her crystalline surface, a man who'd hidden from the world for 6 years, now harboring perhaps the most important secret in human history. He built up the fire and began treating her wounds, using skills learned from years of self-reliance. As darkness fell over the Montana wilderness, James Walker, the man who'd chosen to forget the world, found himself at the center of something that would change humanity forever. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance at redemption. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. James stood at his cabin window, watching as the first rays of sunlight caught Naira's crystalline skin, sending prismatic patterns dancing across the rough-hewn walls. 3 days had passed since the crash, and his mysterious guest was slowly regaining her strength. "Your son," Naira's melodic voice came from behind him, "it's so intense." She had managed to sit up in bed, her opaline eyes fixed on the sunrise. "On my world, we orbit a dying star. Everything is bathed in eternal twilight." James turned to face her, noting how her crystalline filaments seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Is that why you're here? Looking for a new home?" A shadow passed across her faceted features. "No. She hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that left faint trails of light. "I was pursuing knowledge. My people are scholars, seekers of truth. But sometimes, the truth is dangerous." Before James could press further, a distant howl echoed through the valley. His expression hardened. "Wolves. They've been circling closer since your crash. The scent of your blood must have drawn them." "You seem concerned," Naira observed, her head tilting in a gesture that reminded James just how alien she was. "Are these creatures dangerous?" "Everything out here is dangerous," James replied, checking his rifle. "That's why I chose it. Keeps people away." He paused, realizing how that sounded. "Well, people from Earth, at least." A chiming sound filled the cabin, Naira's version of laughter. "And yet you helped me." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. Why had he helped her? 6 years he'd spent pushing everyone away, building walls around his heart as solid as the mountains themselves. "I'm still trying to figure that out," he admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by a crash outside. James moved to the window, rifle ready. In the clearing, a massive wolf stood over his overturned water barrel, its fur silver in the morning light. But something was wrong, its movements were too jerky, its eyes unnaturally bright. "That's not normal wolf behavior," James muttered, raising his rifle. "Wait." Naira's voice carried an edge of panic. "The crash, my ship's core was damaged. It releases a particular type of radiation. It affects organic life, makes them more aggressive, more desperate." James lowered his rifle slowly, processing this new information. "So those wolves will only get worse," Naira finished. "And they won't be the only ones affected. We need to contain the radiation, or your entire ecosystem could be destabilized." James ran a hand through his graying hair. "And I suppose you know how to do that?" Naira's crystalline features shifted into what he was learning to recognize as a smile. "I am a scholar of advanced quantum mechanics. But I'll need your help. Your knowledge of this environment, combined with my technical expertise, might keep us both alive," James finished. He found himself returning her smile, surprised by how natural it felt after so many years. "All right, Professor. What's the plan?" The next few hours were a crash course in alien technology. Naira explained the basics of her ship's quantum core while James sketched maps of the surrounding territory. They needed to reach the crash site, retrieve specific components, and construct a containment field before the radiation spread further. As they prepared for their journey, James caught Naira studying him. "What? You're different from what I expected," she said softly. "My people's records of humans painted you as primitive, violent creatures. But there's a depth to you I didn't anticipate." James checked his pack, avoiding her opalescent gaze. "Maybe you're not looking at a very good example of humanity." "Or maybe," Naira countered, her voice resonating with conviction, "I'm looking at exactly what humanity can be when stripped of its pretenses." Before James could respond, another howl split the air, closer this time, and joined by others. The pack was gathering. He shouldered his pack and helped Naira to her feet, trying to ignore how natural it felt to support her crystalline form. "We need to move," he said gruffly. "The wolves hunt better in daylight, but they'll be watching the cabin now. We'll have to be careful." As they stepped out into the morning sun, James couldn't help but reflect on the irony of his situation. He'd come to these mountains to escape responsibility, to forget the weight of consequence. Now here he was, helping an alien scholar save his corner of the world from radioactive wolves. Naira must have sensed his thoughts. "Having second thoughts about helping the strange creature that fell from your sky?" James adjusted his rifle, watching the tree line. "Nah. Beats tracking deer." He glanced at her, noting how the sunlight played across her crystalline features. "Besides, you're not strange. Just different." Her answering smile lit up the morning like a second sunrise, and for the first time in 6 years, James felt something stir in his heart, something he'd thought had died along with his old life. As they made their way into the forest, he realized that sometimes the path to redemption came from the most unexpected places. Even if those places happened to be among the stars. The journey to the crash site took longer than expected. James and Naira had to move carefully, avoiding the increasingly aggressive wildlife affected by the radiation. The morning sun had given way to heavy clouds, casting the forest in an ominous gloom that matched James's growing unease. "Something's bothering you," James said as they paused to rest, watching Naira inspect a handheld device that had survived the crash. Its holographic display cast ethereal lights across her crystalline features. "You're not just some scholar who got lost, are you?" Naira's fingers stilled on the device. The musical chime of her movements faded to silence. "No," she admitted finally. "I'm not." She turned to face him, her opaline eyes swirling with colors that seemed to reflect inner turmoil. "I'm a fugitive." James leaned against a tree, keeping one eye on their surroundings. "From who?" "The Vardy's empire." Naira's voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. "They're expansionists. Conquerors who hide behind the facade of peaceful exploration. They send scouts to find worlds rich in resources, then strip them bare." A cold knot formed in James's stomach. "And Earth? Is perfect for them." Naira's crystalline filaments dulled, reflecting her distress. "Your planet's biodiversity is unprecedented. The variety of life here, my people would spend centuries studying it. The Vardys would spend months destroying it." James absorbed this information, his mind racing. "Your crash wasn't an accident." "No." Naira stood, moving closer to him. "I was part of the advanced survey team. When I discovered their true intentions, I tried to warn your people. They shot me down before I could reach any major population centers." A distant roar echoed through the trees, something large, something angry. The radiation was affecting bigger predators now. James gripped his rifle tighter. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I've seen it happen before." Naira's voice cracked like breaking crystal. "My homeworld was once like Earth, vibrant, diverse, alive. The Vardys came as friends, offering technology and knowledge. By the time we understood their true purpose, it was too late. Now our world orbits its dying sun, stripped of resources, its ecosystem destroyed." James studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. But her opaline eyes held only pain and determination. "How long?" he asked. "Their main fleet will arrive within months. But their advance forces." She glanced skyward. "They'll be here within weeks, hunting for me. If they find me, they'll know I warned you. They'll accelerate their plans. And if they don't find you? Then Earth has a chance." Naira's fingers brushed his arm, sending a slight electrical tingle through his skin. "Your people can prepare, unite against them. The Vardys aren't invincible, they rely on surprise and superior technology. But humanity's greatest strength is its adaptability, its determination to survive against impossible odds. James was about to respond and a crashing sound came from the underbrush. A massive grizzly bear emerged, its fur matted and eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The radiation had transformed it into something monstrous. "Run!" James shoved Naira behind him, raising his rifle. The bear charged, shrugging off his first shot like it was nothing more than a bee sting. James fired again, backing away slowly. "Get to the ship. I'll hold it off." "James, no." Naira's voice carried a note of desperation. "You don't understand, I need you." The bear reared up, easily 9 feet tall. James steadied his aim, knowing his next shot had to count. "Kind of busy at the moment." "The Vardys, they're not just coming for Earth's resources." Naira's next words froze him in place. "They're coming for humanity itself. Your species has something they've never seen before, something they want to harvest and replicate." The bear charged. James dove to the side, rolling through the underbrush. "And what's that?" "The human capacity for advancement under pressure. Your ability to face impossible odds and win. They've studied your history, how your people constantly overcome, adapt, survive. They want to understand it, weaponize it." Naira's crystalline form began to glow with inner light. "That's why I chose you, James. Why I crashed near your cabin. You're living proof of humanity's resilience." The bear turned for another charge. James's rifle clicked empty. But before the creature could reach him, a burst of energy pulsed from Naira's position. The bear stumbled, shook its massive head, and retreated into the forest. James stared at her. "How did you?" "There's a lot I haven't told you," Naira said, helping him to his feet. "But we don't have much time. The Vardys are coming, James. And unless we can reach civilization and warn your people, Earth will suffer the same fate as my world." James looked at his empty rifle, then at the alien woman who had quite literally fallen into his life. 6 years ago, he'd retreated from the world, convinced he had nothing left to offer. Now the world, no, the entire planet, needed him. "Well," he said finally, managing a grim smile, "I guess isolation was getting boring anyway." Naira's answering smile lit up the darkening forest. "So you'll help me?" "On one condition." James checked his remaining ammunition. "No more secrets. From now on, we trust each other completely. Deal?" Naira's crystalline features softened. "Deal." As they continued toward the crash site, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much bigger than himself. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to run from it. Sometimes, he realized, the path to redemption meant facing not just your own demons, but the demons threatening everything you once tried to leave behind. The crash site looked different in the fading daylight. The ship's hull had taken on a darker hue, its alien metal absorbing the evening shadows. James watched as Naira worked quickly, her crystalline hands moving with practiced precision over the wreckage. "We don't have much time," she said, extracting what looked like a translucent cube from the ship's core. "The Vardy's monitoring systems will have detected my containment field activation when I stop that bear. They'll be coming." James scanned the darkening sky. "How will they find us?" "They'll track the quantum signature of my ship." Naira's fingers danced over the cube, causing it to pulse with inner light. "This data core contains everything, proof of their plans, tactical weaknesses, defense strategies. We have to get it to your military leaders." A high-pitched whine cut through the air, making James's teeth ache. "Is that Vardy's scouts?" Naira's opaline eyes widened. "They're earlier than I expected. We need to move. Now." They plunged into the forest just as 3 sleek shapes descended from the clouds, craft that seemed to bend light around them, making them hard to focus on. James led them through the densest part of the undergrowth, using every trick he'd learned in 6 years of wilderness living. "The nearest military base is in Great Falls," he said as they moved. "It's 4 days on foot through the mountains." "We don't have 4 days." Naira's voice was tight. "The scouts will sweep outward in expanding circles. They'll find your cabin, track our trail." A beam of intense light swept the forest behind them, accompanied by a sound like tearing metal. James pulled Naira behind a massive fallen tree just as the light passed over their position. The bark where the beam touched smoldered. "Quantum disruption beams," Naira whispered. "They'll disintegrate anything organic they touch. The Vardys don't believe in taking prisoners." James checked his ammunition, 6 rounds left. "Good thing I was planning to stay alive anyway." He managed a grim smile. "I know these mountains better than anyone. There's an old mining system about 2 miles east. We can use it to throw off their scanners." They moved carefully through the darkness, using the natural cover of the forest. The Vardy scouts continued their sweep, their beams cutting through the trees with mechanical precision. James led them through hidden game trails and shallow streams, anything to mask their trail. "You're good at this," Naira observed as they crossed a narrow ravine. "Better than any human I've studied." "Had a lot of practice running away," James replied, helping her across a particularly treacherous section. "Never thought it would come in handy saving the world." An explosion lit up the night behind them. The Vardys had found James's cabin. The sight of his home of 6 years going up in flames should have hurt more, but somehow it felt right. Like burning the last bridge to his old life of isolation. They reached the mine entrance just as dawn began to break. The opening was almost completely hidden by vegetation, exactly as James remembered it. "Watch your step," he warned. "These tunnels can be treacherous. Better than being vaporized." Naira's crystalline form provided just enough light to see by as they entered the mine. "The mineral content in these rocks should help mask our presence, but it won't fool them forever." They made their way deeper into the earth, the sounds of the Vardys' search fading behind them. The tunnels were a maze, but James had explored them extensively during his years of self-imposed exile. He led them through the darkness with quiet confidence. "Why did you really choose me, Naira?" he asked as they paused to rest. "There must have been easier targets, military bases, government facilities." Naira's crystalline features softened in the dim light. "Because you represent what the Vardys fear most about humanity. They understand military might, they can counter technology. But you." She touched his arm gently. "You lost everything, retreated from the world, yet still maintained your humanity. Still chose to help a stranger who fell from the sky. That kind of resilience, that capacity for connection even after great loss, it terrifies them." A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels. The Vardys were getting closer. James checked his rifle, more out of habit than hope it would be effective against their pursuers. "Well, let's hope that resilience gets us through the next few days." "It will." Naira's voice carried absolute conviction. "Because you're not alone anymore, James Walker. And neither am I." They pressed deeper into the mines as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. James found himself mapping out routes in his head, planning contingencies, thinking of ways to stay ahead of their hunters. It felt good to have a purpose again, to be fighting for something bigger than himself. "You know," he said as they navigated a particularly narrow passage, "for someone who spent 6 years trying to forget the world existed, I'm surprisingly okay with trying to save it." Naira's chiming laugh echoed off the stone walls. "Perhaps you never really forgot. You just needed the right reason to remember." Another explosion rocked the tunnels, closer this time. James grabbed Naira's hand, pulling her toward a side passage he knew led to the surface. "Come on. I know a way out they won't expect." As they ran through the darkness, James realized that for the first time since the accident that drove him into isolation, he felt truly alive. Maybe that's what the Vardys would never understand about humanity, that its greatest strength wasn't just surviving against impossible odds, but finding reasons to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost. And right now, running through dark tunnels with an alien fugitive while being hunted by interstellar conquerors, James Walker had found his reason. The Great Falls Air Force Base buzzed with activity in the pre-dawn hours. James watched from a secured briefing room as military personnel rushed to prepare for what would be humanity's first interstellar war. 3 weeks had passed since he and Naira had emerged from the wilderness, and the world had changed forever. The Vardy's fleet will exit hyperspace in less than 6 hours, Naira announced to the assembled military leaders, her crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the tactical displays. They'll expect to find a primitive civilization, unprepared and easily conquered. Thanks to the data we provided, we can prove them wrong. James studied the holographic battle plan projected from Naira's salvaged data core. Earth's combined military forces had worked around the clock to implement the defensive strategies she'd provided, adapting human technology to counter Vardy's weapons. The key, Naira continued, is to exploit their overconfidence. The Vardys believe in overwhelming force, but they've never faced an enemy who could anticipate their tactics. Or one too stubborn to give up, James added, earning a few grim chuckles from the assembled officers. He'd spent the past weeks helping military engineers modify their weapons based on his experience with his rifle against the scout ships. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. General Richards, the base commander, stepped forward. All global defense forces are in position. The orbital defense grid is online, and civilian populations have been moved to secure locations. We're as ready as we'll ever be. A young lieutenant burst into the room. Sir. Multiple objects just appeared in high orbit. The Vardy's fleet has arrived early. James met Naira's opaline eyes across the room. She gave him a slight nod. This was what they'd prepared for. Show time, he muttered. The next few hours were chaos. The Vardys attacked with overwhelming force, just as Naira had predicted. But humanity was ready. Modified fighter jets engaged the alien ships, their weapons enhanced with frequency modulators that could penetrate Vardy's shields. Ground-based energy weapons, rebuilt using principles from Naira's ship, provided crucial support. James found himself in the base's command center, helping coordinate the defense. Years of isolation had honed his ability to see patterns, to think unconventionally. He spotted weaknesses in Vardy's formations that others missed. Their ships are clustering over the Pacific, he noted, pointing to the tactical display. They're not used to dealing with large bodies of water. Use it against them. Submarine-launched missiles, modified with Naira's technology, struck from unexpected angles. The Vardys, expecting a primitive response, were caught off guard by humanity's adaptability. This is impossible. The transmission from the Vardy's command ship crackled through the command center. How are they countering our tactics? Naira's voice rang out in response, her crystal tones carrying an edge of pride. Because you never understood what makes humans dangerous. It's not their technology or their weapons. It's their ability to unite, to adapt, to face impossible odds and refuse to submit. The battle raged for hours. Earth took heavy losses, but for every human ship destroyed, a Vardy's vessel fell. The aliens' perfect formations began to break down in the face of humanity's unpredictable strategies. Then came the turning point. A squadron of human fighters, led by a brilliant young pilot, executed a maneuver that should have been impossible, diving through the atmosphere at precisely calculated angles, using Earth's gravity to slingshot around the planet and attack the Vardy's fleet from multiple directions simultaneously. That's not possible. The Vardy's commander's voice held something new, fear. Their technology isn't advanced enough for such precision. No, James replied, allowing himself a grim smile. But our pilots are just crazy enough to try it anyway. The Vardy's fleet began to retreat, their perfectly ordered formations dissolving into chaos. They had come expecting to find easy prey and instead found a unified planet ready to fight for its survival. As the last alien ships fled into hyperspace, a cheer went up through the command center. Humanity had faced its first interstellar threat and emerged victorious. "It's not over," Naira cautioned as the celebration erupted around them. "They'll be back, with greater numbers. Let them come." James turned to face her, seeing his own determination reflected in her crystalline features. "Earth knows it's not alone now. We'll be ready." "We?" Naira's opaline eyes searched his face. "You're not planning to go back to your cabin in the woods?" James laughed softly. "That life ended the moment you crashed into it." Besides, he reached out, taking her crystalline hand in his, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I've got a better reason to stay connected to the world." Naira's features softened into a smile that lit up the room. "The Vardys wanted to study human resilience, to understand your species' capacity for survival. But they missed the most important aspect." "And what's that?" "That humanity's greatest strength isn't just in surviving," she squeezed his hand gently, "it's in finding reasons to thrive, to connect, to become more than you were before. Just as you did." Outside the command center windows, the sun rose over a changed Earth. Humanity had faced its trial by fire and emerged stronger. And James Walker, who had once sought to forget the world, now stood ready to help defend it, not just because it needed him, but because he had finally found where he belonged. As cleanup crews began their work and plans were made to strengthen Earth's defenses, James and Naira stood together, watching the dawn of a new era for humanity. The path to redemption had led him not just back to the world he'd tried to leave behind, but to a future he never could have imagined. And somewhere in the vastness of space, word spread among the stars, Earth was not to be underestimated. For on this small blue planet, a species had evolved that possessed something unique in the galaxy, the unshakable will to stand together against impossible odds, and the heart to find hope in the darkest of times. The end, or perhaps, just the beginning.